Unit 11, Reading 1.
Segregation meant that black people were refused equal rights and opportunities. They were supposed to quietly act like second-class citizens. Poverty and the threat of violence were set deeply in society, and the national government was not interested in change. In the decades after 1910, millions of black people left the South to find better lives in northern and western cities, the Great Migration. Around the same time, many whites began moving to suburbs. Owning a house became economically important for families, but suburban houses were rarely sold to blacks. As a result, many cities in the U.S. slowly developed large non-white populations in the center, while surrounding suburbs became richer and whiter. This development of suburbs also acted like a type of segregation. Solving big racial problems would be politically difficult because politicians could lose white votes in rich suburbs or in the South. The long struggle for equal rights, the civil rights movement, grew slowly, but in the 50s and 60s, big changes began to happen due to court decisions and growing public demands. In the Cold War, communist ideology supported ideas of racial equality. Anti-communist Americans often saw the civil rights movement suspiciously. President Truman grew up in a segregated town in Missouri, but he became more aware of racism and America's global image. In 1948, he ordered the U.S. military to desegregate. In 1954, the Supreme Court judged that segregating public schools was illegal. Some local school systems refused to change, but reformers kept trying to force schools to desegregate. In 1957, President Dwight D. Eisenhower ordered soldiers in Arkansas to support school reform efforts there. Desegregation would be a slow struggle, and the government needed to be pressured. In 1955, a black woman named Rosa Parks sat on a city bus in Montgomery, Alabama. When the bus filled, she refused to stand and give up her seat to whites. She was arrested, but many black people supported her with a campaign to boycott the buses. One leader of this campaign was Dr. Martin Luther King. In 1956, courts decided that segregating buses was illegal. The peaceful protest had become a famous success. Other boycotts of segregated businesses followed. So did more efforts to register black voters. Victories were encouraging but dangerous. In 1963, a black church in Alabama was bombed by the KKK and 4 girls died. In 1964, a group of voter organizers, 1 black, 2 Jewish, were murdered together in Mississippi. In 1965, a peaceful protest march for voting rights in Selma, Alabama, was attacked by police on horses. 17 people were hurt, and shocking TV images of police violence were shown across the world. Hundreds of protesters were beaten and arrested across the South due to their nonviolent protests. Meanwhile, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, which was the U.S. government's national police agency, looked for pro-communist activity. The FBI began to closely watch and even harass some civil rights leaders. In 1963, a big demonstration met in Washington, D.C. There, Dr. King gave a famous speech, the I Have a Dream speech, in which he dramatically described his vision for racial harmony. Liberal whites supported his message of nonviolence and racial progress. The idealistic Democratic presidents John F. Kennedy, shockingly assassinated in 1963, and Lyndon B. Johnson slowly responded to public demands. Congress wrote laws to protect civil rights, like the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Because of this important law, voting in national elections became a nationally protected activity, so states were now forbidden to stop people from voting because of race. Johnson also proposed more efforts to reduce poverty and expand medical care in his Great Society programs. In 1967, the Supreme Court decided that state laws against mixed-race marriages were unconstitutional. Southern Democrats opposed many of these changes. Some tried to create new political parties or switched to support the Republican Party. Despite some progress, anger about injustice and poverty grew among black people, and this anger sometimes boiled over. In the summer of 1965, riots spread in Los Angeles and 34 people died. Riots in the summer of 1967 spread in many cities, killing over 85 people. In 1968, Martin Luther King was assassinated, shot while standing on a motel balcony in Memphis, Tennessee. More deadly rioting followed. The country seemed to be in chaos. Johnson became unpopular and did not campaign to be president again. In 1968, Richard Nixon was elected president. He promised law and order. He also promised to end the Vietnam War.